Just me and Rick starts. I think the rest of the crew is kind of just falling off. It looks like Deb's busy going to concerts all the time, which is cool. She's at the Rolling Stones in Florida for tonight. She went to go see him in Vegas before that and in Detroit. So it's a good reason not to be here. But
I think Mick Jagger takes precedence over you and I every time.
I think so too, apparently. But let's talk about the sponsors. And of course, this includes 420 Promotions, which won't ever get changed until we actually go with what our sponsors are going to be next year at this point, just to be realistic about it. Here we go.
Jazz Cabbage Cafe is, of course, sponsored by the Botanical Company, Redemption Cannabis, Real Leaf Solutions, the important Detroit Nutrient Company, and GrowGreenMI.com.
Very cool.
I like the guy that does that voiceover. He's good.
Not bad. So let me see what we got here. Well, last week, obviously, we had Anton Harb, the Hero Project. We talked about the 1,000 turkey giveaway to take place at Lighten Up Provisioning and Micro Buttery, and which is a cool place. And it went down. Many of us showed up there. Rick was there.
Jamie was there.
I was there. Many people from the community were there. Darren McCarty was there. And the 1,000 turkeys were, in fact, given away. And that's very cool. I took one on the way back and got a text from somebody who knew I was there and said, hey, we could use one of those turkeys, but I can't get out, and that kind of stuff. And so just on my way back, I dropped that off and donated that turkey to somebody in need. So that was all good. Last night at Medical Mondays, there was no continued discussion on the inclusion, diversity issues that have been in the air and tension that it's caused and that kind of stuff. So it was mainly about genetics and what's been going on with trends with new types of flower. And at the end, Roach mentioned that it was nice to take a break from all that stuff, but which I agree. Also, we might talk about it later, but before we get too deeply into stuff, recently we did a special Sunday night edition on Viridis Lab, so I want to just touch on that for a minute too. But coming up, there is a celebration for the effective date of legalization, December 6th, at the Cannabis Council building, 2930 East Jefferson, where it seems to be a tradition now. This is year 2, right?
No, year 3.
Year 3, okay. But it's gone on the night of, and each consecutive year there's been a celebration.
19, 20, and this is 21. So this is the 3rd anniversary.
Right on. And maybe they weren't able to do it because of COVID last year.
Oh, you know what? That's correct. You're right. Yes. So this will be our 2nd celebration, although it is the 3rd anniversary technically. Thank you.
Yeah. And then we were there the night of too, which was a blast. And that's where I think that's where we had Tommy Chong on. We were passing him around on the iPad. That was kind of cool. He was on there live.
Catch some of those videos on YouTube, either on the Jazz Cabbage Cafe channel, on my personal channel, or any one of a number of others. It was packed. It was a lot of happy faces. That's for sure. And the night of, Jamie, the night of the election, that was also quite a party at Cannabis Council.
Oh yeah, that was also rough because that was Dana Nessel was in that election that we had a lot riding on, and of course legalization, and it didn't seem like it was completely fulfilled until some of us got confirmation that Dana Nessel actually did win.
Yeah. And we've been counting down the votes for the legalization proposal, and it just looked, better and better and better. We ended up winning by 56%, but the Dana Nessel thing, Wow, it started out not looking good. And Dana Nessel, for those people who don't live in Michigan, Dana Nessel is our current Attorney General here in the state of Michigan. She replaced a monstrous individual who hated cannabis deadly. You know, Bill Schuette just couldn't stand it. And she's a very progressive, pro-cannabis Attorney General. So a lot was riding on that, because if we passed legalization, but if we had an Attorney General that didn't support it, Jamie, it really would have been obstructed in its implementation. Don't you agree?
Look who's not here, but is definitely coaching us from the sidelines.
Yes, Adam Brook. The election was in 2018. There's 2019, 2020, and we're now in 2021. Third anniversary, my friend. So.
But if it were different, he would be right.
If it were different, he would be right. Like I said, second celebration, third anniversary. But yeah, you're right. So the Dana Nessel thing was quite tense. And we knew that only getting one of those two missions accomplished would have really only been half of a success. But Adam, I hope you're feeling better too. Adam Brook normally joins us here on Jazz Cabbage Cafe. He's in Amsterdam and has been posting recently about bouts of gorging himself on wonderful seafood and then also going to the hospital for suffering from pains and such. I'm not sure those two are unrelated, but
there he is. Adam's owning up.
Adam
just got home from Amsterdam, so he's probably
unwinding
a little bit. Yeah, that's probably a little bit of lag associated with that trip. Yeah. Glad he made it back successfully, though.
But it just underscored what Jamie was saying. The 1,000 turkey giveaway really was pretty fantastic. It took place in Mount Morris Township, just north of Flint, in an area that really needs the help. And it was supported by a lot of different cannabis organizations. There was More Than Hope was there, Michigan ASA, Michigan Normal, the Hero Project. Mike Brennan was there, along with Dave Craybill from iHemp. Brennan did some videotaping inside there. We interviewed Darren. Yep. So there were quite a few different organizations in support, but really the community. I mean, I saw it on the nightly news because I live in Flint. I saw it on the nightly news. There was a lot of publicity about it. Gone, I hope, are the days when just because a cannabis company sponsors something that people will not spread the word about it.
Yeah, so. Anton and company did a great job. And in case people were wondering what Adam's doing.
Adam says he's taking a dump for those of us who are listening on Alexa, Spotify.
I don't know exactly what Jane means in follow up to that, but
Jane was there and got a turkey. Yeah. She's saying thank you for her turkey, not thank you for Adam's dump.
Oh, okay. Right.
So I'm pretty sure that's true.
I'm pretty sure too.
If it's the other way around, please correct me.
And I'm glad that Jane and 999 other people got turkeys. I know. And then the other thing coming up, we talked about the legalization celebration. The other thing coming up is the John Sinclair 50th anniversary of the Freedom Rally, where John Lennon and Yoko Ono and Stevie Wonder and a long list of people came together and brought others together to rally against John's unusually cruel sentence for 2 joints.
Yep. And that'll be at the Ralston House, which is a stone house in Detroit, right, Jamie?
It's okay. The Stonehouse Bar is right across the street from this building. It's calling it the Ralston Holistic Health Center, I believe. It's just south of the State Fairgrounds, and it's just off of Woodward a little ways. It's pretty simple to find. I'll throw up the graphic for it in a little bit, so we can get the address and stuff like that. But looking forward to that.
Proceeds from that go to support the John Sinclair Foundation, which is a worthy cause.
It is. And Jane is confirming that it was about getting the turkey. And
I saw Jane had a picture with Darren McCarty.
Oh, very cool. Yeah. Adam
is too open.
Too
much information, says
Dr.
Jane.
Bob's. This is also about a mile or so from Dr. Bob's. I mean, it's Ralston kind of runs on a little bit of a diagonal off of Woodward, north of 7.5 mile or something, leading up to 8.
Right,
and it's right in there. I'll put the address up there later on.
while we're still talking about events, two other things I want to mention real quick. December 9th is the Marijuana Regulatory Agency's regular review process. They have an opportunity for everybody in the state to either attend in person or attend via Zoom. Their review, you get a couple minutes to tell the MRA what they're doing right, what they're doing wrong. It's an important feedback loop that people have to be able to communicate their concerns, especially considering some of the news that we'll talk about later today. So don't forget about that, December 9th at 9:30 in the morning. And then I'd also just like to say thank you to everyone who sent me birthday wishes. It was the same day we did the turkey giveaway. I did my very best to try and respond to everyone that wished me well on Facebook. If I have missed you, I apologize. I tried my best to get all of them, but it's a big one. But thank you for all the well wishes. And I'm still officially older than Jamie, even though, you might not guess that from looking at us.
No. And we are both older than Adam Brook. Wow. Should be pointed out whenever.
Why do you keep doing that? Why do you keep making me feel bad? Why? I don't know.
We're going to talk with both Dr. Gus Rosania and Attorney Paul Tylenda today. Gus is here now. Let's bring him on. We're going to focus more on, hey, Gus.
Hi, Jamie. Hi, Rick.
We're going to focus more on like the segment that we have planned for him in a little bit. We tell anybody if they really want to come on early and kind of hang out with us and stuff before we get to the segment, that's always okay, or usually okay. In Gus's case, it's okay. But I wanted to bring up the Viridis Lab stuff again for a few minutes, recap that. We did have a special show on Sunday. I saw Smoke and Ropes show today. Most recent development, and we'll give the backstory, is that Viridis is suing the state for its findings, I assume. I mean, they need to see what it actually says, but the state, the Michigan, or the Marijuana Regulatory Agency, has, as of November 17th, placed a recall on all of the flower between, I think it's August 16th and November 16th, at Viridis Labs, either of their locations in Lansing or Bay City, has tested, and it accounts for 60 to 70% of all of the flower that's in the marketplace. So this is massive. And apparently it's based upon inaccurate or unreliable microbial testing results. So it appears as though, and there's a lot of information that needs to be known, that Viridis kind of achieved an unusually big percentage of the market, by pitching their ability to pass these tests and also to have an increased THC percentage more than typical. Not that they're necessarily doing anything. And Mr. Hashbash joins us from back home from Amsterdam.
Hey, no.
And, hey, man. And so, Rick, you want to pick up where I left off? I forgot where it was.
Jamie, you mentioned at the beginning of the description that Viridis has now filed a suit against the state of Michigan. Is that a development from today?
That is, yeah. So okay. I just want to get back to where I was. If you could put me back on track, my brain's not working.
No, you basically were describing the situation. You talked about Viridis and the Bay City and the Lansing locations. They were.
Right, so massive amounts, $200+ million worth of product, a really big deal. Some companies are really going to be affected, if not have to shut down as a result of it, depending on the size of the company and how committed, to using Viridis with all the product. And there are some people that are in that situation. The press, I think there was a recent MLive article in which Rick was quoted that discusses somebody who's in a lot of trouble financially over what has gone down. And so the investigation is ongoing from the state. There's questions surrounding the activities of the lab. They haven't mentioned the THC thing yet. That's just part of the discussion at large, and we'll find out where that investigation leads. But the most recent development, and there's going to be other lawsuits, as we talked about on Sunday too, The state, more to the state, probably more to Viridis Labs themselves. And we'll just have to see where the process takes us at this point. But this is massive.
So I'll tell you this. I'm sorry, Adam, go ahead, please.
Oh, no, I was just going to say it sounds like there's a few problems with the state system, huh?
Well, I'll say this, that it's pretty typical for a corporation to sue the state whenever they have something like this. That's one of the things they can hold out to their customers to say, they haven't proven that we're wrong. Look, we still have them in a lawsuit. And those lawsuits can sometimes stretch for years on end. But the pain's going to be immediate. The pain is immediate.
What they can't get out from under is their ownership and the people involved in that lab. And as someone who proudly represents the black market, I will let everybody know that former Michigan State Police Crime Lab officers are in ownership in that lab. And personally, I've called for a boycott of anybody using product from that lab. I don't know why anybody would do business with those people. I don't know why anybody would shop at a dispensary where the license is owned by a former prosecutor. But that's the industry we have, and I think
where's that, Adam? Where's the former prosecutor owned dispensary? What is that? That's news to me.
I'm trying to remember his name. It was one of the Macomb County prosecutors has licenses in his name.
Really?
You're catching me at a bad time, of course.
Well, we'll have to look into that. That's just kind of
that does
me,
it was
that kind of sparks a memory for me also too, Adam, I believe. So
Gorsica?
Gorsica, yes. Gorsica I believe has licenses his name. And there's known snitches in our industry. I mean, people who have had their name in the paperwork as verified snitches that have everything from nutrient companies to brands. So, some of us actually care who we deal with. Others may not. Others may just be looking for high quality product. I don't know. But so far.
Well, let's remember, too, that as far as cannabis consumers go, we are probably some of the most informed, educated, and active people in the community. So it's oftentimes we fall into a trap believing that everybody shares our same knowledge base. A lot of people just go to a place because it opened in their neighborhood. They don't pay attention to the news. They don't pay attention to anything else. So they just know it as a place to buy cannabis. If they knew the backstory, they probably wouldn't. But most people aren't going to be exposed to something like Jazz Cabbage Cafe, which is, by the way,
it's 420, and Shelly just joined us for the first time in a little while.
That's right. So, yes.
I feel like I need to be caught up on everything. But here's what I can say. What you were just saying about people not being able to pay attention to what's going on. I've been helping out with all these farms, with all these caregiver grows, and I'm the one telling them what's going on. They don't have time to keep up with, and introducing things in October when people are harvesting. And they don't know. They're not thinking about it. They're thinking, I did everything I was supposed to do, and I should be good.
When I was raising kids, let me tell you, it was difficult for me to keep track of anything other than who was president, because you're so consumed. You're doing a full-time job, plus you're working at a marriage, which you need to work at. It doesn't happen just on a casual basis, and then raising children. So when you're talking about that, it's really tough to keep up on the news of the day, especially when the news of the day isn't really easy to find either. If M Live or Detroit Fruit Press doesn't write about it, it's super tough for people to figure things out. I do not like the way that this light is falling on my face. It makes me seem like
Well, I was just thinking, like, I would say things like, oh, you guys know about those bills going through right now that are in committee. No idea. They had no idea. And we're surprised. No, we've already figured all that out. Like, no, it's happening right now. Like today, they're talking about it today. They had no idea.
Yeah,
so that was a big eye opener for me. Just because you're in the thick of it and it affects you doesn't mean that you're not going to have laws changed right out from under your feet.
Yep. And if something like this, an action by the Marijuana Regulatory Agency, they knew how much flower was involved, and they knew how wide-ranging it would be. I can't imagine that they undertook something like this without being 100% sure this is what they were supposed to do. Also, imagine the consequence if the Marijuana Regulatory Agency knew there was a problem with this testing and they didn't take action. And then someone got sick. Well, now the state is kind of at fault then because they knew there was a problem and they didn't do anything about it. So you have to understand that they're in a position where they sort of have to take action first and sort the issues out later. Problem is, we've allowed a system in Michigan where one testing company can do 60 to 70% of all the testing. Even though there's 14 or 15 testing labs out there, one company was allowed to so dominate the market that when they had a problem, everybody has a problem. And that's not the way it should be.
Well, I need to ask a dumb question. Maybe there's people listening that also don't know the answer to this, but how did they get caught? I don't understand how they got caught. I just heard there was a big recall. I'm sorry if we've been over this a million times. I just think it's so basic. I don't understand how it happened.
In August of this year, they changed testing regulations for microbials. They took away one type of test and forced everybody to go to a plate system. Now, this we learned on Sunday at a special Jazz Cabbage Cafe featuring Amy Brown from Abco Labs. Lev Spivak, who also represents one of the laboratories, mentioned that this timing of the beginning of the sanction period and the end of the sanction period is so coincidental with the beginning of that new testing regimen that it's got to be related. So if they just didn't switch over, or they thought that they could still continue to use the old system, or they were no longer following regs, that's what would happen. And by the way, Viridis, this is the second time they've been hit with a problem from the MRA. And the first time, Adam Brook, was because they weren't following regulations.
Well, and I'm going to tell you that I heard specifically that the way they got caught is they were snitched on. Because
I was thinking, like, I never pay attention. I mean, because I like caregiver weed, so I'm rarely smoking something with a label with percentages and tests and all this stuff on it. I don't see it that much. So I was wondering, like, you just get the package with the packaging from the test, you trust it. How does it come out that it's right or wrong? I would have no idea. Who
I'm
found
pretty sure
that out?
A testing lab that has consistently customers saying, I'm sorry, I can't use you anymore. I have to go to Viridis because they're giving me 4% more on THC value. And that directly translates into greater sale. Now, that's a rumor. That's not been proven. That's alleged.
Well, they do have consistently higher
people.
THC, but whether or not there's anything screwy going on with that is yet to be determined by anybody.
Right.
Well, once you understand lab testing, you'll understand how one lab has higher numbers than another lab. Labs are not uniform. Nobody should think that they are. And anybody in the game will tell you if you take your product to 10 different labs, you'll get 9 different responses.
But if you're seeing consistently abnormal responses when one particular lab, and we'll talk to Gus about this when we get to this segment later, but I mean, Gus, when you see 10, 12, 14 labs lined up and one guy consistently produces out of the norm results, you recognize there's a methodology issue there, right?
Yeah, we haven't been allowed to test these results, so it's very difficult to tell what's going on. Excluded from it in academia.
And what's worse is that the way it works is a company goes to get something tested, or they in-house test it, which is even worse. They in-house test it. It doesn't pass testing. They remediate it. Then they take it to a state lab. They have it tested. It passes. Now they want to have it with a little higher THC number, so they go to the lab that gives them the better results. Now they have 2 state labs giving 2 different results, and they publish the higher numbers because the consumer has been convinced that higher THC numbers is where it's at. And 4%, 5% makes all the difference in the world. So, and I agree with Gus. Part of the problem in our system is that academia can't get into these labs. And once it's my understanding, once academia explains to the rest of us how this actually works, we won't trust any of the labs because you're not going to get the same number out of different labs. It's physically impossible.
When we did our special edition Sunday show on this topic, there were a couple people, Cass Coleman, who we've had on here several times, included, suggesting that if everybody were to use the same standard, like the international standard as it pertains to, cannabinoids and terpenes and stuff, that we could have a little bit better of an overall testing system and know when there's things that are really abnormal or not. The fact that there isn't like a single standard that everybody has to use, is the basis of some of these issues.
And you can thank your government for that, because unlike every other industry on the planet, the government has prevented that from happening. I tell people this all the time. We've had machine tested cannabis for the last 20, 25 years. The problem is we've had human tested cannabis for thousands of years. And those of us that use our bodies to test cannabis know the truth. So
we're inhibited by being a new industry which doesn't have established industry regulations. It's not as if we're talking about making baby food here where they've been doing it for 60 years on a commercial basis and they've got things down to a T. So I can appreciate that at one point maybe there was a value to having some ambiguity in testing policy and procedures. But I think this experience has shown us that we need uniformity between all labs. First of all, so they're all playing with the same set of tools. And secondly, so that the consumer can trust that. One of the real consequences of this particular situation is, and not much of a consequence to me, but it is a consequence to the industry. People will believe in the regulated market lesser because of this. The testing cannabis is so much better for you. Haha, what a joke that was. And there'll be people who will be more hesitant to join the regulated market because of it, or maybe even start cannabis consumption at all because of this. I'm always happy to use my alternate sources, to be honest with you. So for me personally, this doesn't change my opinion one way or another, but there are a lot of people out there that are considering cannabis, and this might be a deterrent to their use, and that would be sad.
So I agree with Buddy here. THC levels alone are not an indicator of good weed, and it's even more tragic that some of this is based around people feeding into that because a lot of people believe it. Ad populum. It's a reality of how the market works.
Yeah, and it's not anybody's fault. It just is the way society is. We only have one metric, one way to meter cannabis's quality, other than price, and that would be by THC number. It's completely inaccurate, and it's been portrayed in a wrong way in society. But until terpenes are really widely understood by the majority of consumers, that's how it's going to be.
Well, and unfortunately, the state is still learning the game, because the state could easily mandate terpene profiles, and the state could easily require people in the industry to be educated on this. But because they're still trying to figure out their ass from a hole in the ground, we're educating the state on a lot of this stuff. And, the dispensaries, and I hear they're out there. I hear there are dispensaries out there that put terpene profiles out on display. And I would encourage people to check them out, as much as I hate dispensaries, because at least they understand the game.
That was my thought too about medical cannabis, just retail locations too, is that the approach would be more medical, that in an MMFLA situation where you're really dealing exclusively with medical patients, that you would have that profile out there. You talk about the value of pinene or limonene or myrcene or any of the of the terps. You talk about the differences in flavonoids and how moisture percentage can sometimes affect content. So that was always the hope. But it seems like the trend nowadays, Jamie Lowell, you can speak to this. The trend nowadays is that people are dropping their medical licenses instead of having medical and adult use, and just running with an adult use license, right?
Yeah, more and more. And I think that'll probably become even, it's significant difference in ratio right now. It'll become even more profound, like when big markets like Detroit and Traverse City incorporate the legalization licenses and stuff like that too. I mean, people hang on. There's a need for it with big markets like that only can be medical. House of Dank, for example, has 5 of its 8 stores are medical only.
And that's not from choice. That's because of where they are retail located, because those communities only allow medical facilities, right?
Yep. But yeah, that's going away.
Yep. Well, the fact is, you can be an adult use facility and still respect terpenes, still respect all of the different science involved in it. I'm certainly, those aren't mutually exclusive, but I think that when someone comes in and they're just asking for the highest THC content, I don't know how many people stop and try and educate them as to how that's a bad barometer to use.
Cool.
I think they just probably grab the 32% they've got on the shelf and sell it out.
On the top shelf, you might add.
Yeah, the expensive.
They don't grab to the basement, the bargain basement stuff.
You know, Ryan Basler made a great point the other day. He said there are some stores that simply won't carry anything that's less than 20% THC because either their past experience or their perception is that simply doesn't sell very well to the market. And therefore, I can understand if someone has a 17% THC that they can't market, they might want to go to a Viridis and get it up to 20, 22 or whatever.
That's what makes it more tragic.
Right. But the fact is, you have to, you can't do that. You have to accept your cannabis for what it is and then sell it up on its particular properties and value, not try and pretend that it's something different.
There's a lot of education needed, and one of the great points of communication is at these stores,
right?
And that's a great time for that interaction to result in a little bit better understanding of the nature of the product.
That's where the most information transfer happens, because that's the only time you're staring into somebody's eyes and talking about cannabis. Adam, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that most of us have been around this game for a while, and we've heard the government talking about how, this marijuana isn't your grandpa's marijuana. It's now, much higher in THC percentage. Yeah, well, smoke a joint with your grandpa. He used to get a lot higher on that 12, 13% Colombian gold that had terpene level. Look at the old guys are all laughing. The stuff that had terpene levels that were outrageous. And now people are just totally bamboozled. I mean, I don't know what other word to use, but they're bamboozled when it comes to cannabis and marijuana and weed and whatever you want to name it. That's part of the game too, is to change the name so that we don't really know what we're talking about anymore. Yeah. And the reality is this, that nobody was concerned about the mold that was coming in those bricks when we were getting stoned off our ass on some
actual diesel fuel soaked in.
Right.
Or bug part. I've picked grasshoppers out of my bag. Yes, I have.
Somebody's toenail.
Stones. I mean, whatever. I mean, I understand why, and I understand the game, and I get where the government and their inability to do anything right factors in. But the reality and the truth is very different than the industry that we all find ourselves in and amongst. So,
we've had this discussion with Gus on Jazz Cabbage Cafe before. And one of the comments that Jamie Lowell just flashed up on the screen here talked about it too. When you let your nose do the shopping for you, then you kind of ignoring THC numbers, and your olfactory sense is the strongest of our senses, and it tells you what your body wants. So you could sell. It seems to. You could smell something on Monday and not be very interested, smell the same thing on Friday and absolutely just die for it because your body has different need states at that particular time. So when you talk about letting your nose do the shopping, I mean, that's scientifically proven to be a very good way for you to judge how receptive you're going to be to that cannabis. Gus, are we far off on that?
No, that is correct. And the methods that are currently used have not been fully validated because, again, we're excluded from validating those methods. And the deal is that the only place where you could have legally developed any methods is University of Mississippi in academia. And their strains don't go up to the levels that the strains on the market go. So the academics are transparent about how they do their work. They show everything so that if you're cheating, somebody can catch you, and then you can share samples, and then you can figure out if anybody's making mistakes. So it tends to be a correcting system. Even in academia, 30% of the studies are reproducible, and these are serious scientific studies, not just testing from labs. So there's still problems with reproducibility in academia, and now in these labs where nobody has ever checked and there's no transparency, you don't really know what they're doing. It's very hard to tell if any of those results are believable, and there's every single reason to doubt them. So I've been at the University of Mississippi. They'll tell you that nobody has ever looked at a gummy. Nobody has ever really looked at any of these products. So we really don't know how to measure whatever's in there. Flowers pose a difficulty because they're complex structures. So where you sample is going to affect what's your THC, CBD, terpene levels. One thing to test blood. Blood is pretty much the same. Everybody's blood is the same, and wherever you take the blood in sample in the body, it's going to be practically the same as it is everybody in every other place. Urine, the same thing. So urine is pretty much the same in everybody. A little bit of difference here and there. Sometimes it's more dilute than others, but it's always pretty much the same. So because those samples, blood and urine, are the same pretty much in everybody, then there's consistency in how they're tested. There's agreement in how they should be tested, so they yield accurate results. But in the case of these very complex samples like flowers, edibles, brownies, nobody knows. Nobody has any agreement on what's in there, and we're excluded from being able to do any of the analysis. And without that kind of transparency that academics are expecting, it's very hard to say that any of these results are believable. So
science is reproducible, right?
Well, the truth is it's not 100% reproducible. If you look at the numbers, it's more like 30% reproducible. But each scientific study that's published in a peer-reviewed article is actually reviewed by 3 independent experts that are looking to see that the data that's publishable could be reproduced, and that everything that has been done follows a certain protocol that anybody else can repeat in their own lab. So that's the fundamental requirement for publishing a scientific study. There's no such transparency expected or guaranteed from any of these testing labs. And part of the reason is because academics are excluded anyway. So, how can you have peer review when there's no peers to review anything? Everybody's pretty much working. It's an insider kind of, job that's being done, and we don't know what's exactly being done. So it's very hard to evaluate whether, it's being done correctly or not, and much less if it's reproducible.
Shelly.
Yeah, that's the thing I was asking about with this how did they get caught thing, because if all the labs are different and half the population probably doesn't care at all about the results anyway, and the results that are necessary 2 years ago are different now, like, you feel like people easily slid into this cheating because they think, what difference does it make at this point? I mean,
somebody must have got sick or something. Like there have had to be some flag raised somewhere that somebody said, well, there's all this mold in here when tests said there shouldn't have been, and at that point they retest, and yes, there's mold, so let's recall. I mean, if there wasn't a serious problem, they wouldn't have recalled. So
I think it was with the methodology more than it failing. I think there's concern about if it was accurate or reliable, were the terms that the state used.
I doubt. I mean, I would have expected they would have just stay quiet. Honestly, if it was not serious, I don't know why they would have not stayed.
Well,
quiet.
I wondered if somebody just thought, oh, they can't get away with that. More people are buying their stuff because they show higher percentage and we're going to tell on them. I didn't know if it was that kind of thing or like someone got sick.
Well, the director said at the director said at Jamie Cooper's event in Detroit, I think it was on Thursday night, that they are not saying that it's bad, like it's failed. They're saying this can't guarantee that it is not contaminated, that it's right, because the methodology is not reliable or considered accurate.
And this is about bureaucrats trying to keep their job, because if word got out that the state didn't do a recall after all the silly recalls they have done, then there would be people at the state level that would lose their jobs. This is about somebody figuring out that, like Rick said earlier, that we got a beef with these guys, and oh look, they got caught doing something the old-fashioned way as opposed to the modern way, and someone dropped a dime on them. The state pulled the trigger like they have to, and it's unfortunate, but that's what happens in an emerging market.
Yeah.
Adam, this really does seem to have followed like a predictable chain of events, right? They were told to change. Everybody else changed. These guys thought for whatever reason they didn't have to change, or they were in compliance. And then you get hit, you get recalled, then there's a lawsuit. All of these things seem to be following a very typical chain, right?
Yeah.
This is massive, man. But you know, Paul has joined us. He actually was part of our conversation on Sunday night for the special edition. And I don't know if you want to wrap anything up with this, Paul, but we're going to take a departure and talk a little bit about some of the other stuff that's been going on in the legal world, and then get back with Gus too a little bit. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, I've been seeing, I've been hearing some kind of reports that are indicating that, you know, perhaps this issue with Viridis was, I guess, no secret, right? It had been talked about and in the works for a long time, that what they were doing and how they were testing and what, let's just say, how they weren't testing was no secret. The other one from a lot of practitioners is that there was this sort of unspoken but very well-known idea that, hey, you want better testing, go to Viridis, right? Your THC will come back 10 to 20% higher, and that's what everybody wanted. So everybody who was, you know, getting 17s was all of a sudden getting 20s from Viridis, and that was the big issue. Now, that's not, let's just say, the issue on the table for the MRA, because the MRA's issue has to do with the moldy, and let's just say the contaminants and the microbials.
Yep.
But there's that secondary issue. I heard a story today, and again, it's just a story, but one of the inspectors said that they were inspecting at Viridis, and they were passing material that had mold on it, visible mold on it, and they were passing it, and there was nothing within the power of the inspectors to do to shut them down and stop it.
Which, again, all falls back to what I'm talking about, in my opinion, and that is that there are bureaucrats that realize that the system is broken, that they're going to get hung out to dry if they don't do something. So a massive recall, as damaging as it might have been to the industry, is acceptable from their point of view. There's no reason to mitigate it in any way, shape, or form, and just issue a 2-page bulletin, and we'll just, get back on track. Well, this has just spun this industry out of control at this point.
So
it really is.
What was just described? I just want to go back to what was just described about something that's, you can visibly see it, but it passes the test. Is that an obvious remediated?
And it's an MRA person who said that. This isn't some disgruntled employee or some competitor. This is an actual person whose job it is to pay attention to this stuff, right, Paul?
Yeah, and that was the report, and that's has to do with how, let's just say, perhaps the hands of the investigators are tied, because there isn't an enforcement a component of that immediacy, right? And that was the other portion of it, was no one from the state police is going to touch it, because all they can do is write a simple ticket for possession, which isn't appropriate. They wouldn't do it. And no other prosecutor would take any other ticket or violation that we write, because there aren't appropriate violations to correspond to this type of behavior. And everybody, every industry, especially, an industry that's as fresh and new as this, are still going to have a lot of people who want to not be constrained by the rules, right? And if you think about the MRA is the warden, and the industry is the new prison, and they're having problems with breakouts, right? They're having problem with people busting out of the system and making the warden and the prison system look bad. So Adam's right that there's a lot of, let's say, bureaucratic band-aids that are going on to keep the image of certain things alive. But there's also a lot of truth, because, water is seeping through the dam. And some of that stuff, it's bound to happen. It's going to happen because of the age of the industry. I mean, the same thing was happening in the newfound liquor era after Prohibition, when they're trying to adjust things and get things back on track. But these are the kind of violations that I think that they're anticipating and are, let's just say, foreseeable, because who doesn't want to cheat to get ahead?
Paul, there's been much ado made about the fact that Viridis is still operating, that they have not had their license pulled, or they haven't been suspended. But in legal parlance, right, until an actual charge has been made against them, they really can't suspend their license legally.
Ongoing investigation. I mean, that's
correct.
Yeah.
Correct. And that has to do with just the procedural, right, the procedural due process rights of the licensees, because that is it's a LARA issue. Now, is there a device that would allow them to be, essentially the same thing that happens to cops, right? They get desk duty, or they get suspended with pay, that kind of stuff. What's the ability? What's the limiting measure that prevents them or stops them in their tracks, right? Where is the idea that someone sees something and says, hey, from a mile away, I can see that's contaminated, stop the presses. And now we have to go back through. So now we're not dealing with a recall, which affects the whole industry. We're dealing with a jammed production line, which affects that company that wasn't perhaps scrupulous enough or honest enough to participate in the industry properly.
Could
and instead of punishing them in advance.
Could their lawsuit,
the whole industry? Yeah.
I'm sorry, man. Could their lawsuit against the state potentially hold up a state's plan to suspend, fine, punish in some way?
In my mind, I don't know that the licensee would have remedy against these accusations from the MRA unless they were proven to be wrong, which apparently they haven't been. So the MRA comes out and says, you did A, B, and C, and then science comes out and says, actually, you didn't. And the MRA eats crow on that.
But there's still governmental immunity, though, right? They're still not individually liable, even if they were wrong, right?
Exactly. And that was, I was just going to say, and so what, right? If the MRA screws up and calls your mother fat, oh, well, it's just life goes on and there isn't much you can do.
Mom.
I mean, right. But there's certain, yes, there's always going to be certain areas that you can push and certain exceptions to these, the simple rule of government immunity. But are you going to be able to crack that in a court? Is it worth it, right? The lawyers, after discussion I had last night, the first thing that was said to me is like, well, the lawyers are going to have a good Christmas because they're the ones that are going to be stirring all this up. And again, this is going to be an issue that isn't going to be, let's just say, answered soon or resolved quickly, right? Everybody's going to have, some mystery until the MRA comes out and says, okay, here's how you're doing it. And here's what you should do. Because I think what everybody is afraid of right now is to do something that the MRA hasn't told them yet to do, which is, do you need to file an insurance claim? Do you need to file a lawsuit? Well, all the MRA can do is govern the product.
So you just said that it's difficult for Viridis to do much about it, yet they did file a suit today.
Against the MRA?
Against the MRA, yeah.
Yeah, right. Which, anyway, was the teaching law school. Anybody with $150 and a bad attitude can file a lawsuit. And that, I like that as a preventive measure, as to say, hey, we didn't screw up and we're here to prove it. Or I'm going to have to read that, because is it one of those show your cards, prove that we screwed up? Or is it one of those we're kind of falling through because there are no rules, you can't.
Right.
You can't
You
say
have
you
no
violated
authority
them.
to enforce this.
The leader of Viridis was quoted in the paper, and he seemed to imply that the MRA was paying extra special attention to them as if they were singled out in some way. And that's oftentimes what sometimes people sue over if they don't have any actual thing to argue with, right?
They say,
oh, you're picking on me, so you have to stop that, even though, I was doing it, but you were picking on me. So.
They claimed the state was, quote, unjustified, prejudiced, and retaliatory.
Prejudice and retaliatory. See? Yeah.
Okay.
Prolonged campaign of harassment aimed at Viridis.
Prolonged campaign of harassment.
Right. It's interesting where these people who own Viridis come from, because these sound like things that activists used to say that, you know, they were targeting us and shit like that. I mean, it sounds like these people have heard this argument before and now they're using it in their favor.
Well, that's kind of standard corporate drivel, though, right? This is the kind of thing you say when you want to prove that someone else has been disadvantaging you. You don't say I did something wrong. You say they were paying too close attention to me, right?
This is corporate law enforcement too. Don't forget that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
but Paul
they
had mentioned the enforcement angle of this, and that, you know, Lara would be in his scenario with the prison. Lara would be like the government itself. And unfortunately, the government has no problem knocking on little old ladies' doors and asking to do plant counts, and then seeing that they're over their 200 plants and refusing to charge them with a misdemeanor, and instead wanting to send these little old ladies to prison. But there is no multi-million-dollar industry or lab or former law enforcement officer involved in that scenario, I guess.
So one time, that just reminded me, Adam, I'll throw it in on top. There was a situation where an 80-year-old woman was getting her phone returned from a police officer. A police officer noticed roaches. She then said that she was a patient, but her card was expired. She ended up getting arrested and spending the night in jail.
Right. But they have enforcement for that. They're willing to ruin people's lives and destroy people, but they won't risk going after a lab where they claim for the health and safety of the people using the product. I mean, remember, these are the same people that are concerned about all this shit that I have no interest in, and I'm willing to smoke the stuff before it's tested. But they want to make sure that some cop doesn't forget to arrest an old lady with roaches in her ass.
Hey, you know what? So we ended up talking about this a little bit longer than I anticipated, although I think it was a really good conversation, and I definitely appreciate it. But now we have a good transition because we're getting into the asshole cop territory. And
my favorite.
This is where Paul can pick up on us. We would go over some stuff that's going on from Lapeer. We've had a long-standing issue with some of the players in law enforcement in Lapeer County. Gary Parks, for one. I mean, that goes back to organization Rick was involved with many years ago, in which he's on record saying he can do whatever he wants.
He answers to no one.
He has been.
Yeah,
right, and it's remarkable too, because I can think of too, like, in, you know, to the credit of Lapeer, I really can't think of anybody but Mr. Parks that has been such a piece of sandpaper. You know, it was something like it was personal, it was vindictive, it was something about it, because, you know, I've had cases up there and I've had plenty of all types of encounters up there, and it's a small town, and you get the small town kind of, you know, Opie and Andy kind of approach, which is great. And then you have Gary Parks, who, you know, is there to clean up the town. He's the two-gun sheriff. And it's remarkable that after all this time, I mean, the guy has been supposed to have been retired next year for the last 10 years. And he's still there. It's still there. And it's absolutely remarkable that he's one of those, and maybe the unions have something to do with it, or maybe it's just one of those issues, or maybe they're just short staffed, but no one is surprised. No one is at all in a mystery as to how that guy works and what his reputation, his legacy is, and it doesn't seem to bother anybody. And that, for me, is the worst of it, that you can be like, yeah, that should maybe trust him, that guy with your wallet kind of approach, but that he's still there. He still has, you know, still has a job and is still in control. But essentially the scenario that I was in,
sounds like he knows a lot of people's secrets.
You know,
the right people.
There's a lot of stories there. I mean, for sure. But the court system has seemed to be consistently pretty screwy on this issue too. And I know that you know, Michael Comorn has spent a lot of time there and had a lot of battles there.
Mm-hmm.
You know that Bernie Jockins is right in that county and spends a lot of time having to bang against a, you know, difficult situation. And many lawyers who we know and we work with.
It's a one-horse town. For being so close to civilization, they act like they're remote, and they get away with it. And they always have. My whole career up there, they always have. And it's sort of remarkable at how, I don't want to say backwards it is, but it's remarkably unsophisticated up there. And the situation that I had actually was from a companion case from what Mike Camorn had from many years ago. Was there was a couple, a husband and wife that had, I believe it was a farm, and the farm, I believe there was some problem with the search warrant, of course, with Gary Parks, you know, they raided the farm. And they ended up taking, like they used to, and this is, I think we're talking 2017 when this happened. And they took everything that wasn't nailed down, anything that had value, anything that they could resell, right? So one of those things was an RV belonging to the grandfather. And they took the RV and they took a whole bunch of other stuff. And what they never did was issue a notice of forfeiture, which they are required to do. They take your stuff, they issue a notice of forfeiture with, here's the stuff we're taking. You have, at that point, you had 21 days to respond. You had to post the bond at that point and take it from there. They never filed a forfeiture action. They never filed any of the forfeiture documents. They never filed any of the forfeiture lawsuit. And the criminal case wasn't actually charged until I think sometime later, that may have even been after, I'm not sure if it was in 18 or 19, but I believe it was sometime close to or after recreational law passed. So it was a little bit out of step and out of tune. So through this process, it's discovered that they have all this material. I mean, they have tractors and all kinds of personal belongings, and they never filed suit. Well, the statutory requirement is to proceed with the lawsuit, prepare a lawsuit within 6 months of the seizure of the items. So in 2020, almost 3 years later, I filed a claim and delivery suit against, and this is the fun part. At first, it was against the sheriff and the county, because it was the county and the agency that committed the act. I filed it, and the first thing I get back from the county's attorney was, you can't do this, governmental immunity, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, I'll just name the cop who took the stuff. So I amended the complaint. I named Gary Parks, and it went through, and that complaint was silenced at that point. And then they fought back, saying the same thing. You have no grounds to sue us. And I'm like, well, these statutes say that I do. And it really was about the change in the law that occurred shortly thereafter, which is the new forfeiture lawsuit, or the new forfeiture statute. And in that, it was the same bit of, you have to proceed in 6 months. And if you don't, you got no leg to stand on. So in my pleading, I actually counted out the months, and I said, you know, part A was, this statute requires you to file suit in 6 months. And it was like, I don't know, 30 some months at the time that I had filed the suit, and they still hadn't filed it. And they went through it. And of course, what was their position? They told me they didn't do anything wrong, right? They said, oh, this is all part of it. The prosecutor's response was, the RV is part of the criminal case, and we might need as evidence. So I responded to the prosecutor, and I said, if you can tell me the last time you brought an RV into the courtroom, or that the judge let the jury go out to walk through the RV in a criminal drug case, you let me know. And if that's the case, then I'll concede. I'll walk away at this point. You guys can have it for the criminal case. And they weren't able to do that, of course, right? They're just like, oh, no, we're going to do it. I said, I'll bet you $1 that judge in town will never let that jury go witness that RV, because it's not germane to it. So once they lost their argument on the evidentiary value of it, because I said, take your pictures, take what you got, and give it back to me. Once they lost their evidentiary value to that, they were just kind of getting lost in the weeds of damages, because they took this, they parked it in this Lapeer County lot for 3 some odd years. And of course, my client's concern is whether or not they had taken care of the property that they had seized. And an RV is sort of like a boat on wheels. It requires winterization. It requires proper maintenance. It requires all kinds of care. And now I was chasing the county for the amount of damages to the property. So what ended up happening was, in order to preserve the amount of damages, in order to essentially mitigate what the county was responsible for, they had an inspector come in, and their inspector determined that the RV had, A, B, and C damage, and it would cost so much to repair it. So they used that as an estimate for my client's damages. I then sent out an independent examiner for the RV, which is just another RV person. And when he gets there, I get a phone call from the attorney saying, I hate to break it to you, but your RV inspector actually does the work for the county. Like, not some of it, he does all of it. So my inspector was conflicted out. Again, it's a small town, right? Not a whole lot of people work on RVs up in that part of Michigan. But in order to preserve or mitigate, stop the damages from the RV, I was able to get them to return the property to me in order to do an independent evaluation from it, so that they would no longer be, let's say, on the hook from the damages that occurred from that day forward. They would only be on the hook from the damages from essentially last Friday to 2017. So the plan was to take the RV, to have it evaluated and made an independent evaluation as to the value of the damages, and then we go back to court to fight over the damages, which I don't know if you've ever seen what happens to an RV if it's left sitting in a field for 3 years, but it ain't the way you left it. It drove, but diesels, I could put a diesel under the ocean for 2 years and that thing would start. But the condition of the RV and the habitability of the RV is really an issue. So I still have this preserved damages claim against the county and everybody, which of course will result in them trying to just cut me a check for what they're responsible for and take it from there. But in efforts to get the property returned, I had to get the court order. So I submitted a court order, and I had to take a copy of the court order to the yard and the sheriff who was holding the property. When I had inquired as to where am I going and who's my contact person, the answer was, Gary Parks is going to give it back to you. And sure enough, go to the window, and there's Gary Parks, as nice as can be, happy and smiley, glad to see me and my client, going in there, giving the court order that says this property shall be returned, and saying, okay, great, I'll take you guys right over there. And then him driving us over to the yard where it is, talking, making small talk, making jokes. And then as soon as we got there, he kind of just disappeared. It was a remarkable encounter of watching him absolutely eat crow on the matter. But those are the kind of things. And I really hope, for our sake, I really hope that wasn't just an accident, right? It wasn't just, Gary was there and he did it and he knows with the keys. I hope that was done as, like if you're a kid and you stole something from the store, your mom would make you go return it and apologize and hand it back to the clerk and that type of stuff, right? I hope that was part of the lesson. I hope that was part of that moment of humility that was the punishment and the efforts of self-correction. Because
that seems kind of thin to go on, though, because Gary Parks' personality doesn't seem to be self-correcting in nature, right?
No, I'm a hopeless optimist, and I get it. But in terms of what could be taken away from that, yeah, fuck yeah, come see me. I haven't seen that guy in years. And first thing I said to him was like, "You're still here, Gary?" And of course, right? Oh, I'm supposed to retire next year. I'm like, you've been saying that for 10 years. Get out of here. But
Jamie Fricke was in the comments too, and she's had a long and storied history with Gary Parks. Anyone that wants to learn more about that can Google it. It's pretty lengthy and tragic. And again, that's another situation where when you have the right set of attorneys, Lapeer County's down home old boy style of justice doesn't really hold up to legal muster, right?
It doesn't, and that's always part of it, right? It's like the Chuck Norris movie, right, where it's like the judge is the mayor and the ice cream store owner, and he owns the post office, and he's also the sheriff, right? It's like small town stuff that they're playing on the lack of sophistication or the lack of ability for these people to defend themselves properly. And it's always been, we saw it all throughout the MMA. We saw it in the early days of the MMFLA. And it's just a way to, if the cops want to turn up the heat, they'll always will. And I've always told my clients, I said, in the battle of fuck you, the cops are always going to win.
They win.
Because they always get that last trump card of like, okay, well, you're right. All right, fuck you, you're arrested. And even if I end up being wrong, you spend time in jail and I don't get proven wrong until months down the road by the time everybody's forgotten about it.
And with governmental immunity, your penalty for being wrong in that instance is nil, right?
Right.
Reprimand, a letter in your file, that's about it.
And at best, and I tell you what, to even get that, you'd have to do something like pretty much admit to it.
And worse, the ability to move from jurisdiction to jurisdiction to jurisdiction after being chased out of jurisdictions. And then when you can no longer work in the local communities, you go work for the feds. And I mean, I just dealt with that today coming through customs. The guy that raided my house is now a Border Patrol agent. He meets me in the customs hall when I fly in and out of the country. And I consider it harassment. But, he knows he ruined my life and he likes to say hello.
It's the archdiocesan approach, right? It's the same thing that the Catholic Church did. It's like, oh, this priest is bad. Well, new job somewhere else, right? Same thing with cops. I mean, how many cops have we seen in the past decade where something happens to them and all of a sudden they're working up in some small town?
Google a cop's name and lawsuits, and you'll be shocked that each guy that we talk about has multiple. His name's in the paper multiple times, and then eventually he moves on to the next jurisdiction.
Yep.
Well, and Jamie Fricke just posted a comment saying that the police officer we're talking about, Gary Parks, had to actually pay her $5 as part of the restitution
$5K.
for a situation when he was wrong. So the fact is, we're talking about a person who has a demonstrated history of overzealously enforcing what little bit of law he has.
The sad part is he knows he stole the $5,000 and he was proud to pay it. He was proud to give it to her because that's what kind of assholes those people are.
That's how they get their victory.
They're happy to make it right, just like Paul just said.
Yeah. Well, and that's always the twist. Sir. That's always the twist for every encounter, even the one of the most recent ones I had where Gary Parks went and stood on someone's porch so that they could see over a fence with binoculars to make out some grow room. And it was obviously not in the grow wasn't in conflict with the MMFLA at the time, or even the MMA, and Parks was breaking the law, and it got the search warrant anyway. And when I went in there, I'm just like, it says in his report, he used binoculars from the porch. I'm not even going to file this. Like, just do the right thing. And that case resolved with some sort of weird, like 45-day non-something ticket or something like that. That was just this, give us something to put in our books and go home kind of shit. And it was, I don't even think it was a fine. It was a $25 fine or something absurd. But to give you an idea of like, someone thought that case was great because Gary Parks told them it was great. And that was, they probably had 100 years of those cases in Michigan.
Before the medical cannabis laws in 2008, we know that Gary Parks was doing wicked things. And after 2008, we had some measure of defense, but clearly not everybody was given the same rights. We saw, some people be extraordinarily dealt with. Jamie corrected us here, saying the $5,000 she was paid was a civil contempt settlement. But we just want to correct the record on that one for those of our audio-only listeners who wouldn't be able to read the comment. So she also writes, he's been on camera going into a grow and then coming back with a warrant. And she also observes he's a domestic terrorist. That's a phrase that sometimes is attached to police officers who exceed their limits. I mean, Budson and Nevers killed poor Malice Green. I mean, what they did, Adam shakes his head because he knows, right? I mean, there was
it's unfortunate to say that it culminated with the killing of Malice Green.
Yes.
Budson and Nevers were known as bad cops, but Malice Green is a saint because of what they did, what he did in his death. He exposed these clowns.
That's my exact point.
Everybody knew who they were.
Yep. Once that's okay. Once Budson and Nevers were exposed from killing Malice Green, all of the bad stuff they did before was exposed. In 2008, we got a medical marijuana law, and it suddenly sort of exposed some of the horrible tactics that law enforcement had been using against cannabis patients for all that time, because Now they had a defense against some of the things that had become commonplace in the way that police officers treated cannabis patients or cannabis users. So,
it's remarkable. We've come a long way. I mean, hell, just in the last 10 years, come a long way.
The difference is we don't gloat about it, and those guys love to wave that immunity around, and they're not willing to play fair. You know, turn me into a cop. I'll give up my immunity. Make Adam Brook a police officer. I'll be responsible for everything I do. Okay? Elect me sheriff, which I can be
can't
sheriff.
Imagine you chasing down a criminal, though, Adam, just to be honest with you. I can't imagine what that would look like.
He's a fleeing felon. I can shoot at him.
Okay.
You need a faster chair.
I think that defines bad cop, right? I can't catch you, so I'm just going to shoot you in the back. Okay.
That's right.
Effective law enforcement, right?
No,
it works, doesn't it? We've seen it.
I'd vote for Adam over Bouchard.
Thank you.
Oh.
Thank you. I'll say this. We can point to bad examples of police officers and how they've treated cannabis patients. Fact is, Paul, some of that stuff is still going on, right? I mean, we're talking about caregivers right now, and some of the municipalities have changed the rules on how they're dealing with caregivers because of a law called DeRuyter, and or a decision rather, a court decision called DeRuyter, and that's really put caregivers back into the scope sight of law enforcement, right?
It's the back door, right? I've always said that the worst enemy of recreational is the building department. And that's because it's the end around by saying, oh, you're not actually breaking the law, but you're breaking building code. And, you know, I give some progressive credit to the city of Roseville, because I can remember Roseville even prior to MMFLA and even, especially rec, but when they realized they couldn't do anything about the caregivers, they went to double check all the building code. And they went in there and then said, okay, you don't have proper electrical, you don't have proper ventilation, you don't have these necessary permits. And then the city of Warren really took that and ran with it, where they would just drive down the street and look for extra drops, look for extra condensers, look for the telltale signs of somebody driving a whole lot of power into one location. And it turned into that type of enforcement, because then it was, which is where Detroit is now, which is, oh, here's a nuisance claim, right? So now we're kind of coming back full circle into McQueen, which is, we're not going to crack skulls and cuff you and put you in jail, but we're going to raid you and shut you down as a non-conforming use, as essentially a nuisance. Then we're going to sue you under nuisance and have, the possibility of padlocking your door and all that be up in the consequences. And I'm dealing with
familiar from our Chesterfield Township days, Paul. With
exactly right. It's because essentially what's funny is that if you look at the non-skull cracking measures, right, that are available, right, look in the quiver of the government now. Their biggest arrows are building code,
local enforcement,
enforcement, right? The city of Detroit's doing that.
This has been our nemesis since we passed the MMMA. The Michigan Municipal League immediately came out and said, local control, local ordinance is the only way you're going to be able to control this. And we've been fighting against them ever since. And just recently have they gotten some headway with some of this stuff. But people, and that's where people have to understand that when it comes to the nuisance thing, most of these nuisances are abatable. We can abate them if given a chance. They do, even extra drops on the side of the house. We can cover them if you don't want to see them. That it's all abatable, but they're not giving us the chance. Instead, they're using their local authority to do something the state can't.
Right, and they're piling on. So they'll say, oh, well, you've got to have this done, and then we have to have an inspection done. So now you get a permit, you have to have it inspected afterwards. They're going to find another violation. And then, I've got clients that are going through the red tag process where they show, it's like, oh, you're out of compliance, you're a nuisance, red tag on the door, do not enter. And now you're shutting them out of a business, and this goes back to something we talked about earlier, is that process, while allowed by ordinance and statute, is frankly what they should be doing to the bad actors in the labs, right? Go in there and say, oh, we saw mold, red tag on your door, right? Until you can prove to us that there's no more mold and all this stuff has been addressed directly, you can't enter this building for commercial purposes.
Right.
And if you do, you need a government escort. But that's what again, why don't we treat the licensees like we've been treating the caregivers?
Well,
So
because then
they,
they find out the dirty secrets of the licensees about the reason you saw mold, the reason that inspector saw mold is because that had been remediated weed in a lab, tested in a lab, remediated, and then sent for state testing. So, the real question to me when it comes to nonsense like that is, okay, we tested it, it's clean, it passes for whatever microbials and everything. Now we put it in a package, and 6 or 8 or 12 months later, what's the mold content of that package? How much mold grew from the little bit that passed to where we're at 6 months later, if you're so concerned about mold?
Well, I mean, people handling it too is an issue.
Right.
Like some of the contamination
yeah,
issues. I was just told recently.
Where does fecal matter get onto cannabis? And those tests, we've already seen those.
I was told recently that the biggest problems with failure in the labs have come from the handling of it during the testing process itself.
Yeah.
So you know what? I don't know, Paul, if you want to wrap up a little bit more about that and stay with us to get into another discussion with Gus here. He's been hanging out the entire show with us, and he's got some stuff that we want to talk about as well. But is there anything you want to wrap up on this?
No, I mean, I think that it's the lesson is that some of these things that we thought were gone or that passed away with legalization, still there might be some zombies out there. There might be some ghosts. There might be the fucking living dead walking around, and that's because attitudes don't change quick, right? A guy like Gary Parks only carries a hammer, so everything he sees is a nail, right? So there's no way to change that. You can't teach that old dog new tricks anymore, and it's something to watch out for. I mean, I hear stories about people getting pulled over and the cops are busting their chops like it's the old days. It's like, fucking write me the ticket or don't. You don't have to see how much weed I have in the car. Piss off. So,
I smoked it all where I stopped.
So, anyway, I know some of the stuff we're going to talk about is, over-regulating, some of the stuff's going on with the Delta 8 scenario. And now we've had Gus on before. Dr. Rosania is the School of Pharmacy. Well, for these purposes, with the School of Pharmacy at the University of Michigan, and has been trying to do more research, been trying to be able to grow.
I've been doing more research, but not with anybody's help. Actually, against everybody's obstaculization, impedance, making my life miserable.
Right.
But I'm making progress.
That's awesome, man. But I know that one of the things that you are doing to try to move things ahead is seeking some more leadership roles within the university itself.
Yeah, because I'm fed up. I mean, I tried to do the research. I just got fed up. I figure I have to get into a position where, I'm devoting myself full time to getting rid of obstacles. And, the only way to do that is to move on from research to a more unpleasant administrative job and just get rid of all this all these. Well, actually, I'm not going to get rid of anything. I'm actually going to institute a new bureaucracy, which unfortunately is not what I want to do. Nobody wants to put in a new bureaucracy, but it's necessary because there's no way to handle cannabis and psychedelics research. So even at the federal government, I mean, it's this Schedule I substance. It's no medical use. The FDA doesn't want it. The DA doesn't know what to do with it. NIH is depending on the other two to say something, and they can't get anything together. So I think at the end of the day, what's going to happen is in the federal government, you may have a separate agency dealing with these psychedelic substances, so maybe herbal medicines, natural medicines, hopefully. And then it's going to go down from the federal government all the way down to universities where this research is going to have to be done because we're 80 years back. Unfortunately, because if we hadn't had the Controlled Substances Act, this wouldn't be the case. in the 1960s. They were doing this research, but it's been completely it's been a waste. So 40 years wasted. Again, the longest standing war we've fought is the war on drugs to this day. To this day, in Colombia, 88 massacres this year. I mean, there's an indigenous leader assassinated in Colombia every single day, So it's nonstop. It doesn't end. I mean, you don't hear about it here, but it's in Colombia. It's daily, and these are massacres.
And the Colombians at this point are trying to push forward legalization and let everybody know that that's the direction they're heading in. And it's not.
But there's still a black market. I mean, there's
Right.
a black market. There's still a black market here in the United States, and that's where the money comes from. And as long as there's a black market, you think, well, maybe the U.S. supplies, maybe Canada supplies. No, I mean, they're even supplying from Colombia. So to the extent they can make profit, the black market is going to be supplied from wherever, your profits are going to be, greater than the expenses in the production. And the Colombians are set up to do it. So, and part of that system is to massacre, innocent people, steal their land to do the black market business. It goes on to this day.
Here in the United States, we have the regulated market and we have what we call the black market. Our black market isn't like the black markets in other nations where literally they stop people from participating in the regulated market through fear, kidnapping, public executions. I mean, Gus, I'm not exaggerating when I say these things. These are actual stories.
Yes. It was in the news today. I posted it on Facebook. In CNN, CNN reported, if you can still trust CNN. I don't think they're not lying, because I was in Colombia. I spent 6 months in Colombia taking care of my mom who was sick during the pandemic. And every single day there was an indigenous leader assassinated and massacres left and right. The 88 massacres this year. And these are drug traffickers. These are criminal organizations that are killing indigenous leaders to get their land, to grow coca on their land or marijuana. That's how they call it. I like to call it cannabis, but I prefer to call the black market material marijuana. And then they're polluting their water, stealing the waters, essentially taking over reservations of indigenous people. So it just keeps going to this day.
Gus, the majority of this that you're referring to is land for coca production, because that's clearly the more profitable land.
They want to make the indigenous people want to make tourism, and
right.
What happens is the water goes to agriculture, and then they can't have water to drink. The indigenous people, they'll take rivers and they'll divert the river to water the crops. And oftentimes, you have indigenous populations in land that is not well watered. That's the reason why they get pushed out there. Same here in the States. All the Native Americans end up being pushed out to the Badlands where there's no water, and the little water they have now, they're deviating it so that it goes to these illegal crops. And obviously, then you have indigenous leaders standing up to that, and those leaders are getting killed, and then villages are getting terrorized with massacres.
Really what I was trying to get at, though, Gus, was that the land that they're trying to seize, or that they are seizing by doing these massacres, that land is being primarily used to harm coca, not necessarily to farm marijuana, right?
Yes. Well, it's actually, I hear it's both. So yes, they're also doing marijuana. I mean, obviously, so it's a regulated market. Okay, so whenever there's a regulated market, the prices are going to be high. Right? It's the same thing. It's happening everywhere, and from Colombia now there's huge demand. So they've legalized exports, and in Germany now, Germany is legalizing. Actually, I think it's just full-fledged legalization. Yeah. So in Europe, you have this growing market, and you can't grow cannabis in Germany. They're growing it in Colombia. So there's huge demand. And it's still regulated in Colombia. You have to get permits, and the permits, they're increasing in value. So the legal product, again, it becomes more expensive to sell, and that creates a market for the illegal products. So I mean, it keeps going on. So
So over regulation caused. Then California describes a similar issue too. They have an issue like competing with the alternative markets or black markets or whatever you want to call it.
Yep.
And then they keep on trying to make more prohibitions, thinking that's going to resolve it.
Those foundations run generations deep, though, and I think that oftentimes people come in with a regulated marketplace and they just underestimate how deeply ingrained in society the unregulated the legacy market is. You've got families that have grown cannabis for generations in Michigan, and they're really not going to change the way that they do things. And to expect that all of a sudden everyone's going to kowtow to those new regs, that's unrealistic. And in Gus, in your case,
right,
this is oftentimes a subsistence economy here. This is not about trying to create excess. These are people just trying to survive.
Yes, absolutely. So they're just fighting for their survival, and and they want to keep their culture as well. And actually, they're better off keeping their culture, because if they move to these cities, they're going to be in slums with no jobs, so they're going to be even poorer. So at least here, when they're living in the rural countryside, they can farm. They're healthy. They live relatively well, and but they're getting murdered by these by the guerrillas and the drug traffickers. They're one and the same. So I mean, that's one aspect. So the other thing, which I think we may get I think we're really close to getting legalization, and the reason is this Delta 8 THC, which as I've been learning. So I was just at a meeting in California, a Canna Pharma meeting, where they're actually talking about regulation. And what I'm learning about Delta 8 THC is the DEA has pronounced itself that this hemp-derived Delta 8 THC is legal. Okay. I think this would be a really good source of THC for edibles, and at that point it becomes indistinguishable from Delta 9. And and if it's indistinguishable from Delta 9, I don't know anybody's able to test and distinguish between Delta 8 and Delta 9. Delta 8 has every reason to be cheaper than Delta 9, because you can get it from CBD, and the CBD is coming from outdoor grows hemp. That can be converted to Delta 8. So Delta 8 comes from a semi-synthetic root from hemp-derived CBD, and this can lower the prices of because it's also federally legal, and if that's the case, it can be substituted in products, and if it can be regulated. So if the assays are not set up to distinguish Delta 8 from Delta 9, then Delta 8 ends up substituting for Delta 9. Okay, and at that point, we're all going to be taking Delta 8. Okay,
hey, Paul, this is a good one for Paul, because you're saying it's federally legal hemp-derived Delta 8. It's federally legal. Yet in Michigan, it can only be distributed through the existing cannabis commercial system, and some states have completely restricted it, banned it. So is Michigan and those states that have completely banned it are being unconstitutional?
Oh, you're on mute too.
No, I was going to say and this just happened within the last month or two, it seems like, but what they did is they essentially said anything having to do with THC is governed by the MRA. So they just folded that, potential new product under their wing and said, okay, if you're going to sell that, it's going to be done through this endeavor. And it really isn't any different than when they fold in certain types of drinks or malt beverages under the LCC by saying, yeah, this contains something that we're going to govern, and the only body that can really govern that authority is that entity. I don't think it's unconstitutional because it serves that government interest, and it actually makes it, in a sense, it kind of legitimizes it by regulating it, right? I think it's Ohio that doesn't have any regulated system of Delta 8. So you can just buy it in the gas station and it's sold in the gas
Texas
station.
too, I think.
Yeah,
I don't
Texas
know.
is another big one.
I just don't know how they're going to regulate it because the assays are not set up to detect and distinguish Delta 8 from Delta 9. So, I mean, they're structurally very, very similar. I mean, they're actually almost identical compounds. But, I mean, the deal is that Delta 9 has been in nature. It's an ancestral medicine. Delta 8 is a semi-synthetic, and it's known that a very small change in a molecule can lead to very, very different kind of toxicity properties. And that's the case of thalidomide, which is actually a mirror image of the drug product. So the drug product thalidomide wasn't toxic. This is a drug that was around in the 1950s. It's responsible for a lot of field malformations. But what happens is the mirror image of the drug, and the mirror image is actually produced by the body within people. Okay, that mirror image causes fetal malformation. So just a change in the way the atoms are, positioned in the drug that makes one molecule, your left and right hands mirror images from each other. That can be the difference between a molecule being a teratogen, it crosses the placenta, affects the fetus, versus one that does not. And in the case of Delta 8, THC, we actually know nothing about it. That's a semi-synthetic. It's a new molecule. It's a creation of, basically the federal government, because of their legalization of hemp and hemp-derived CBD and downstream, chemical conversions is created by the federal government. And now we have this substance to deal with, regardless of whether or not it's regulated. I mean, it's not whether it's regulated, it's whether actually it can be enforced. And I don't think anybody is set up to enforce it. So, and it's there. It's going to be there. Again, there's going to be a black market. There's going to be a need, especially now with all these product recalls, right? I mean, it's like,
right. And what you're getting to also talks about the lack of being able to distinguish between any of the substances. And I know this was an issue in Texas and ultimately down south. And this is what I've heard is called affectionately the trucker's excuse, is that this isn't marijuana, this is hemp. And they can't, it's going to take some lab time and some testing to prove it. And then as you start to get into the distinction between Delta 8 and Delta 9, is that going to be, again, something that you can't slice thinner so that they're not going to be able to tell the difference? And maybe that won't be to the benefit of the person carrying it. Because then if the machines can't tell the difference between Delta 8 and Delta 9, they're just going to treat it like THC and, screw you for it, depending on where you are.
Yeah, so there's a lot of questions about all these assays that people are doing, and the mold assays. These are pretty straightforward assays. I mean, it's like how simple can an assay get? You're just checking for mold. You're trying to measure how much mold. But when you're talking chemistry, molecules, and you're looking at very, very small changes, that's going to require, again, a lot of science, a lot of chemistry, and I just can't see how they're going to do it between now and summer, fall. I mean, this whole year, I think we're going to be flooded with Delta 8. And I was in California. They were selling on the beachfront park in La Jolla, which is as posh as you can get in the United States and as conservative as you can get in the United States. There was actually a tent selling Delta 8. I couldn't believe it. I could not believe it.
Paul, let me ask you a question. If there's someone who's accused of driving while impaired under the influence of THC, can we make an argument now that that's actually Delta 8, not Delta 9, and that technically they're not illegal in the bloodstream? I see your eyebrows going up.
I really like that. I had thought about that in terms of even some of the hemp arguments, right? Because you can compound the amount in your system. So I guess that goes back to the same issue, is that can the technology distinguish between the Delta 8 and the Delta 9? Now, in the gas chromatograph, there's the chart, or I should say like the image that they try to mirror in order to determine that is in fact THC. And the question would be, do they have something, a specimen sample that would allow them to distinguish between the Delta 9 and the Delta 8 And if not, I think that's the argument. Would I want to be the first one to try that case where the prosecutor would just say, bullshit, it's all Delta 9. There's no such thing. I mean, you'd have to spend a good amount of money on experts, but I think that would be the appropriate way to fight that case, is to say, this isn't what you think it is, but you'd also have to have good facts. Like you'd have to, like, let's just say, find a bag or a pre-roll of Delta 8 in the car, right? Something that kind of plugs it together. Or maybe even nothing, so there's nothing, no other implications.
I mean, we're better off with Delta 9 because Delta 9 is the natural product, is the one that is the ancestral medicine. Delta 8 is a new thing. That's an invention, you know, and there's no reason to be, as far as I'm concerned, there's no reason to be concerned other than the fact that we've had these previous cases like thalidomide, where we have had this kind of issues happening and they become very serious. But, you know, Delta 8 is a completely different molecule. It's a cannabinoid. There's no reason to believe it's going to be causing any, you know, any fetal malformations or anything, you know, pretty serious. But you know, we're going down this path, and I think at this point we're better off if we just legalize Delta 9. I mean, that's you know, that's the answer, and then you can flood the market with Delta 9, and people will have to make smart decisions about, you know, how stoned they want to get. You know, I mean,
Gus, are you familiar with the methodology by which Delta 8 is extracted from CBD products like hemp?
So yeah, it says two-step chemical synthesis reaction. It's as simple as it gets in terms of chemistry. It was developed by Raphael Mechoulam, the same person who first synthesized THC, and it's pervasive. I mean, it's pretty straightforward to do. So you know, and this is, I mean, I see it as pharmaceutical industry, you know, being reborn in Michigan, which is a great thing because it was destroyed by Pfizer when Pfizer came, shut down Warner Lambert, Park Davis, Pharmacia, Upjohn. Searly completely took out the whole Michigan pharmaceutical industry. So Delta 8 is a rebirth, but I think it's taking us in the wrong direction. We should really be thinking about the plant and extracting, you know, the chemicals from the plant, using the natural products, and not just cannabis, using natural products from fungi, from all these different psychedelic, sacred plants and medicines that are harmless, that are non-lethal, that's been around for since the beginning of time. We have been symbiotic to them. We just ignore them because of Controlled Substances Act. You know, we have to go back to the original, the ancestral medicines and start figuring out how they are safe, how they're effective. You know, what's their use. I mean, this is what we should be doing in the rebirth of the Michigan pharmaceutical industry, rather than going back to the synthetic or semi-synthetic chemistry side of things, which is where Delta 8 is taking us. But, you know, I mean, on the one hand, it's good that we have a revival of the pharmaceutical industry. But on the other hand, I don't want to see us go back to a Pfizer or one of these synthetic organic chemistry companies. So, you know, we have a lot better technology now that we can use to modify the plants' genetic makeup, and, you know, and tailor the plants. And I know a lot of people don't want to hear that, but you know, but these genetic modifications that can be done in the plant are much safer than synthesizing drugs from chemical building blocks that are actually petroleum derived. So at least it's green chemistry. Okay, so we could have a green chemical pharmaceutical industry in Michigan that would stem from these ancestral medicines, and maybe the spirits are not going to get as mad at us as they're now with opioids, hopefully. But I see this as being the right direction we should be aiming for.
So, Gus, we're really talking about a product that would be extracted from industrial hemp, which would be great for Michigan, but in your previous example, would also be really good as an alternative crop for people in Colombia, right? In an environment where you can legitimately harvest 3 big yields per year on your land, it seems like that's a much more productive or much more potentially financially viable product than coca, which is, it's harvested during the course of the year, I believe, right?
Yeah, well, so coca itself, again, so coca, the plant itself, is a sacred medicinal herb. In Bolivia, they use it to survive in the
It's
mountains.
it's a superfood, isn't it? I mean, considered a
Yes,
superfood.
yeah, well, yes, it's a they make a tea, they make a tea out of it. It's actually part of what the people use just to survive, because they're up in the mountains. There's very little oxygen, and coca helps them carry normal life. It's just like a tea. And if you use the leaves, and you can use it on a daily basis, it's healthy. It's like green tea. Okay, it's only when people start extracting the components, concentrating them, and then using it at very high doses. But the idea is that people often do that because they're actually lacking these components as they're part of their natural life, their natural, just living, their culture. And then they suddenly find, if I get high, I'm able to go after a girl at a disco. But, they could go after the girl anyway if they maybe were to use the right foods, the right plants just on their daily life. They wouldn't have to use the drugs. And that's
But
the deal.
The real shame with cocaine is that the process of getting it from the coca leaf to that white powder that people are familiar with decimates the communities. The runoff, the chemical process is just, it's foul. There's no positive way to do that out in the jungles. I mean, it's not a lab synthesized product. And that to me is the saddest part, that you have these indigenous cultures that grow this coca plant for survival, and then it's turned into this other product through a chemical process.
Yeah, I mean, the extractions wouldn't be necessary if it was just part of our daily life. And same thing with cannabis. Probably we wouldn't even be using it if it was just part of what what we could access in our food. And because we're not thinking about abusing curcumin or pepper. I mean, these are all widely available, but but if you start prohibiting things, then and these things have been in our surrounding, in our environment from the beginning of time, and probably our bodies even need it. We start looking, humans are we're animals actually. So if we find something that's deficient that we think we need just to perform, whether it's to wake up or to do our daily chores, or if you're socially timid to go after a girl, whatever, we will turn to those chemicals to help ourselves. And if we don't have them, if we can't find that balance naturally, we'll get it artificially with these extracts or with these synthetics, or we'll go to a doctor and get it from a doctor. I mean, it's part of our instincts. But if we have access to these in natural forms and we just don't make a big deal about it, my belief is that we would settle down on a more sustainable psychological state overall. In a at a higher level of consciousness where we wouldn't have to go through all these up and downs. Mm-hmm. We would just self-regulate, and then enjoy more. Life would become more enjoyable, and we would not have to turn to concentrated drugs
and blowing each other up.
Yeah, no, certainly not for so-called entertainment purposes, which I don't believe in. I think it's not really entertainment, but it's actually self-medicating, trying to bring back some level of sanity to our life and performance. But ultimately, if we're able to give our bodies what our bodies need, and our bodies are smart, our bodies can take this material from the food, and our bodies know what to do with the food we give it if we give it good food. So if we were to give our bodies good natural food, our bodies would know how to absorb the food, take it, process to our best benefit, and we just wouldn't have to get sick. And if we don't get sick, we wouldn't have to use these drugs.
Help us to realize our connection to nature, and then our desire then to want to be more protective
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
We are great apes. If you need any
Yeah.
proof, just look at Adam.
I mean, we have departed from nature. We have departed, and we used to think that these fancy, fancy shiny buildings were cool, but now you see these buildings, and I don't know. I mean, I look at them, they don't look pretty anymore to me. When I was a kid, I used to think, oh, cool, there's a skyscraper. Personally, now I enjoy nature a lot more than I enjoy buildings. There's too many buildings, too little nature. I don't know about the kids nowadays, whether they prefer nature to bridges and buildings, but I find myself enjoying nature more. Maybe it's just my age. Maybe it's a change in consciousness. I don't know, but hopefully we're gonna be gradually turning away from the this synthetic chemical way of living into a more natural state of living.
A lot of people report having a more of a connection and understanding of nature by way of using plant medicines.
Yeah, so I mean, as we're losing nature, I think we become more appreciative. So as we really lose it, I think we start to really cherish nature. I mean, and look, and the ocean. I mean, the ocean is getting filled with plastic. So I mean, it used to be you could go to the ocean and you'd expect nature. I mean, you wouldn't expect the ocean to be filled with plastic, but it's getting filled with plastic. The beaches are getting filled with plastic. So at some point, people are just going to realize, I mean, this is horrible.
The Great Barrier Reef is dead or dying.
Yeah, I mean, but it's coming, like on the beaches. On the beaches is, the beaches are getting destroyed with plastic. So you can actually see it on the beach. And it's coming from the ocean. I mean, there's
tiny plastic pellets in the very deepest parts of the ocean floor. They sample the mud down there and they find tiny little plastic pellets.
They find it in fish.
Dead fish with plastic pellets inside them because they can't process it.
And the interesting thing about the pellet is that's a pre-processed, that's a pre-molded plastic that they're finding. That is blowing out of train cars and containers and ending up in our waterways.
And some of those little plastic balls are approved to be added to foods to increase volumes and stuff like that. Isn't that right?
It's amazing. I actually read a whole book on this, and I can't remember. It's on the other side of the room. I'm trying to remember what it was. But I read a book on this plastic and how it's ending up in our oceans and where it's actually coming from. And it's just fascinating that, while we think straws and cans and bottles and that type of plastic is a real problem, that's a minute part of the problem. That's the part that's easily cleaned up and filtered into, landfills.
There's an island the size of Texas filled with that kind of shit, from what I understand.
Right. But it's those small beads and particles that are the real problem.
Right.
Yeah, there's going to be more plastic than fish in the ocean within our lifetime. So that's how much plastic there's going to be in the ocean. And like Adam is saying, this plastic ultimately will become powder, and it's not just going to be a Coke bottle. I don't want to advertise Coke here, but
you were talking about coca leaves earlier.
But it's gonna be powder that's gonna be in the fish that we're eating. So that's where
that'll help to counteract the mercury.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, but I think we're at the point where we're almost reaching that natural higher state of consciousness. I think we're getting there. And maybe delta 8 THC, I think maybe that will do it. So within the next 8 months, I think we may get flooded with delta 8. And if we get flooded with delta 8, the federal government better do something. That's as much as I can say at this point, because it really looks like we may get flooded. So
we've talked about the great garbage hole in the middle of the Pacific. It's huge. There's a corresponding one in the Atlantic, and there's really just a monster problem with that. There are some very inventive people out there trying to come up with solutions. Sometimes entrepreneurs have been given prizes for their methods of helping to
Those
clean up.
ships that like eat the plastic or whatever.
Exactly. Yeah, right. Exactly. They have a little thing. They just swoop through and load it up.
Bacterias and things that eat it that are trying to be developed.
Yeah, but we certainly don't want to introduce more bacteria into an environment like that. If you wanted to take that plastic on land and drop it someplace where bacteria can munch on it, I think that's the better route than trying to introduce it in the middle of the ocean. But we're really, I know we're getting close to the end here. We're starting to wind down, but this is a really valuable conversation. And Gus, we talked previously about sending plants in space, and I just always love to touch base on that because, you know, even now space continues to be a thing. We're going to send a special DART probe to nudge an asteroid and see if we can actually deflect it and change its trajectory.
No, what I'm looking for is to establish a cannabis science program at the University of Michigan, and I'm also looking to see if I can beat Elon Musk to the moon actually, and get cannabis growing there before he gets there. So that, I mean, he's focusing on sending people up in space. People is a lot harder. We should go with cannabis first. You know, set up a nice cannabis hotel on the moon, and then charge him when he gets there. You know, charge him good money to to put back in planet Earth. I mean, he wants to go on vacation on the moon. Well, you know, we'll set up the farms, the plants. You know, plenty of cannabis there. And we'll charge him well, so that then we can come back here and invest that in furthering cannabis technology. So he can travel. I mean, I think
then he can take that technology to Mars.
Then he can take it to Mars.
He may end up dying.
Just steal your ideas and run to the bank with it. I know what it'll do.
Yeah, he can go to Mars. I mean, he wants to go to Mars. He can go to Mars. I think the moon is better. We can actually terraform
a little bit closer. Yeah,
it's way closer. It's way closer. And there's no reason why we shouldn't be able to do this in the moon. I mean, since he wants to go there, he's putting all this money to into this research project. We might as well beat him to it. And there's countries that also want to get to the moon and to Mars, like India, for example. But India may not have the technology to put a person in the moon. But India could put plants on the moon because there's no risk. You know, there's very little risk. You just have to take the seeds there and then grow them, figure out how to grow them. So we'll figure out that part. Maybe not with Elon. We'll do it with us, with the governments in India. Maybe the government of Thailand, Brazil, other countries. Well, maybe Elon will be open to it. Maybe Elon wants to also invest on taking Canada.
I know we're winding down right now, Gus. But what are there any ideas out there, just out of curiosity, that you've thought of or that you're aware of, like big magnifying capabilities or something to try to grow on the moon?
Well, so what I would like to get everybody to do, okay, and this can be a crowdsourced experiment, is to grow cannabis plants upside down. Okay, so you put the pot here, then you seal it with the soil, and you put the light underneath. Okay, the light underneath, and see if the plant grows upside down. And we need to find strains that are not sensitive to gravity, that don't have to grow up, but can actually grow down and produce everything that cannabis can produce. And those strains are very likely to be less gravity sensitive, if not insensitive to gravity. So if we can get everybody to do this here in Michigan, okay, we may actually put ourselves light years ahead, because we will have strains that we can send out to space, low gravity, and grow before any other scientists in the world can come up with this.
Grow your cannabis upside down campaign.
Yes. Upside down, light in the bottom.
Drip system that works from the roots instead of from the top of the soil. Sure, yeah, right.
Yes,
yeah.
Enters the space race by way of growing cannabis.
We can enter the space.
Wow.
Yes, our cannabis growers can enter the space race.
Well, I'll be taking a video clip of this. This is going to be out there.
Yes.
I hope in 4 or 5 months we have all these people sending us pictures.
Oh man,
how they suspended something upside down. Gus's plan, we'll call it, and I just can't imagine.
It's Toma tomatoes, right?
We'll blow people's mind away. I mean, this will be revolutionary. We can get this going if we can get everybody to start doing these experiments with all their strains, and we come up with strains that are not gravity sensitive, that grow down if you put a light source in the bottom, oh man, this would be awesome.
Citizen scientists, as cannabis growers, oftentimes you take that role and you never get credit for it. But this is a way where you could do that, grow the upside down cannabis, take credit for it, videotape yourself, and maybe even, get to name a moon strain or something like that.
I don't need to take credit for anything. I'm already having plenty of fun.
Hey Gus, anything you want to wrap up with? We have just a couple minutes left.
No, I'm good. I'm happy. So I'm still alive. I'm healthy. Grateful. Thank you for hosting me here.
And soon to be president of the University of Michigan.
One day, hopefully, yes. That would be awesome. That would be really awesome. That would allow me to do everything I've always dreamt about doing, and start.
You can find the president out in the hemp fields.
Yes. Yeah, we can have a cannabis science program. I mean, not just cannabis science, because it's also anthropology, archaeology, arts, everything, linguistics. I mean, cannabis has been in symbiosis with humans since the beginning of time, as well as all these other herbs and plants and mushrooms. So they've been part of human existence forever. And we've just ignored this for the past 80 years. So
right on.
Yeah.
You trying to say something, Adam?
Yeah, I thought better of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hey,
Okay,
Paul,
no, I'm going to say it.
There you go.
I'm
All
not
right.
trying to promote any brand or anything out there, but to what Gus was saying, there's a company called Topsy Turvy that grows weed plants upside down, and it's a grow system. I used to be in the business, so I know it. To say that if people in Michigan did it, we'd be light years away. That wasn't lost on me, and that'd be kind of cool to see some photos.
Bring back Topsy Turvy.
Well, we can start breeding. Then we start breeding with Topsy Turvy upside down plants. We breed it, and then let's have all the kinds of varieties in the world, so we can start shipping to the space station to produce seed, to produce herd, to produce all kinds of different CBD, THC, terpenes, because we're not just going to need one kind that grows upside down. We're going to need every kind that grows upside down, because we got to produce all these different products and varieties from cannabis.
Right on.
Yeah, we need to start breeding the upside down plants.
We'll talk about that again for sure. Thanks a lot, Gus. Appreciate it, man. Hey, Paul, anything you want to wrap?
Covered a lot. I always have a good time with you guys.
Good, man. We'll have you back on before too long, I would imagine.
I appreciate it.
Hopefully for some
Always.
better stuff to talk about than lab scandals and big money interest takeovers and stuff like that.
Good news next time. Good news.
Yeah. Well, you got some stuff back that was
Yeah,
seized.
that's right. That's great news.
Yeah, that is good news.
Grandpa's happy.
Man, Adam just got back from Amsterdam.
Yeah, I got off the plane and came on live with you guys.
We want to hear more about that, man. But obviously,
Dedication.
we will have to carve out some more time on the next show to hear about that a little bit.
Oh, I got video.
Okay, I'm sure we'll see that throughout the week too. And
Yes.
you'll be back on your morning routine.
Yeah, it was a good time. I mean, Amsterdam's great. Weed's not legal there, so it's fun to be somewhere where you're technically breaking the law smoking weed. It's tolerated. I also really don't smoke much flower while I'm there. I smoke mostly Moroccan hash and Nepalese hash.
Nice.
So, it's a good time. I encourage everybody to go. Not now. COVID's kind of crazy over there. But
yeah, there were some mandates or lockdowns or new.
yeah, everything closed at
Protocols.
8 o'clock. On a Friday, they decided that come Saturday morning, you were going to close at 8 p.m. And, coffee shops, if you don't have a QR code, they call it, of course. But if you don't have proof of vaccination, then you could only go into a coffee shop, cop, and leave. But in order to sit inside or outside on their terrace, you needed to have proof of vaccination. And they're locking down pretty hard. But at the same time, you could go on to just about any street corner in the club neighborhoods before this lockdown, get a test, and that afternoon have a piece of paper that would let you into the club for the night. So it was really bizarre what was going on. And the food's good. I ate well.
Good. Awesome, man. We're glad you made it
Scored
back.
some pills from a doctor while I was there. That was kind of fun. Got some hardcore drugs. I was told that wouldn't happen. It happened.
That's
talk
the
about all
pusher
that.
man right there. The pusher man.
So, we had Shelly was on for a little bit, and just appreciate everybody for coming on again. Jazz Cabbage Cafe, and Rick, if you don't mind wrapping us up.
What a wide-ranging conversation we had today. I mean, there's so many things that we started talking about that we want to explore some more. Food in Amsterdam being one, space cannabis being another, Paul's past successes being a third. But the fact is, we're recording history here. We're talking about some current events that next week, the next current event will have blocked this out of our memory. So if we don't get it down now, sometimes it disappears. Let's just enjoy our moments, and happy Thanksgiving to everybody.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Likewise. Happy Thanksgiving.
Right on. All right, Jazz Cabbage Cafe. See you guys.
Be well.
Do it again next week.
Take care.
That's what she said.